Hello and welcome to another episode of Taking Flight. My name is Dr. Heather Dartez and I am the Director of Graduate Programs here at Full Sail University. And this panel today is about record deals. It's how record deals work and also other DIY alternatives. And I have my very special friend, Brandon Egerton. We've worked here at Full Sail together for many years and he is the director of, you're basically over all the audio arts programs, right?
Absolutely.
Here at Full
That's
Sail?
absolutely right.
And so can you share a little bit about your experience and, what you did before Full Sail and how you tie into this panel today?
Sure thing. Excited to be here. Excited to have great conversation with all my panelists today. So, how did I get here? It's a question I get sometimes. Man, it started. I'm just a kid with a dream of working in the music industry in my heart. It's what drew me to my college I went to back in North Carolina, and had an opportunity to go seek out an internship that really required me to move from the comforts of home to Nashville, Tennessee, this place I'd never really been before. But I was pursuing this internship opportunity at a place called EMI Music in Nashville, one of the big, at the time, big four record companies. And, you can imagine just being an excited and eager lad getting their start in the music industry. And so I did that. I was fortunate that internship led to an employment opportunity at EMI. They hired me initially as a radio promotions person, at the label. So I did that for about a year and a half, and then worked my way into the A&R department, which is what I did for the bulk of the decade that I was at EMI Records. But while I was there, there was this itch I just kept having to scratch, just that had to involved helping develop the careers of artists. And that's the thing that inspired me to start my music consulting company, which is Sideman Music Consulting. Still do a lot of that today, working with different artists and creatives. And it's also the thing that drew me to Full Sail University. I asked myself, man, how can I, impact this next generation of musicians and creatives, and what better place to do that than Full Sail, which is where I serve today as the education director for the Audio Arts School, which encompasses our recording arts program, music production program, show production, and our online audio production program. So excited to be here.
Very impressive. And I know that you have such a heart for helping people and helping your students. So I can't wait to hear what you have to share today about the music industry.
Thank you.
And we have two graduates that are joining us today here that are immersed in the music industry today. I had the pleasure of getting to know them when they were both students here at Full Sail many years ago. They've gone on to do some really awesome things. So I'll start with our other Brandon. We have two Brandons today on the panel. Brandon Thomas, tell us a little bit about your background and experience. I know that right now you are an artist manager working with Ruben Vincent and Tyler Loyal, which is wonderful, and currently joining us today from Charlotte. But he's a two-time Full Sail grad, both from their music business bachelor's program and our entertainment business master's program. So Brandon, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
My journey started, I think, young, like everybody else. I was considered to be like Shazam in the car. Any song came on, I knew the lyrics to it. I didn't really know where that love of music was going to take me. I think it took me up until high school of like really kind of cultivating where I wanted to go with my life. I started working with like my classmates, managing them, or what I would consider managing them at the time. I graduated doing the same thing, starting to work with local artists around the city. And I just reached a glass ceiling at some point, which then brought me to Full Sail. I didn't know I was in community college. I didn't know really where I was going to go. I just knew I needed to be in school. And one of my friends at the time had recommended Full Sail to me. And I was completely unaware, but as soon as I looked at the website, I saw music business. Okay, that's what I'm going to do.
All right.
So, yes, exactly. So I came to Full Sail. I started in the music business program, and I worked at a Plush recording studio. I was doing like marketing, helping with them with their social media. I also was part of the Grammy Recording Academy, Grammy U, and then that helped kind of usher me into going into the entertainment business master's program. And from there, I got my internship at Rock Nation, which I had been, talking to everybody about since I got to Full Sail. So it was great to, it was great to get that opportunity. And I worked my way from intern in the marketing and management department to intern in the A&R and promotions department, and then coordinator in the A&R and promotions department, and then finally director of A&R before
Amazing.
leaving. Yeah, before leaving and doing my own thing in 2020.
That is so impressive. And like, it's so funny because when I met you, Brandon, and you were a student in school, and I can say the same thing for Chris, you were standout students. You were students that were going above and beyond, not just doing your normal coursework stuff, but getting involved in Grammy U and, interning with a really reputable company. And then that turned into a really great opportunity for you. So it's been great to see your career grow. And I'm not surprised by either one of you finding success to where you're at today. So I'm really proud of both of you. Chris Martinyago, let's talk a little bit about your background, your experience. Chris is a music business bachelor's graduate, and he now works with Prescription Songs, which is Dr. Luke's publishing company. Dr. Luke is a really well-known producer. He's been in the industry for years and years. Chris, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah. I feel like the whole thing with Full Sail was like learning every aspect of the business. And then, especially with music, going into Atlantic, I didn't know how long I was going to be there. And then almost a decade later, now I feel like I'm learning again at a company that's relatively new, Prescription Songs, music publishing company. It's been around for about 13 years. The biggest probably artists signed currently there, probably Doja Cat, who's been there for about 9 years, Kim Petras. We've had producers come up, everyone from KBZ to J Cash. Obviously, Luke is still super active, and writers like Emily Warren on the Dua Lipa records. And that's the thing, is it's working with writers, producers, artists, and working on my favorite part of the industry, which is songs. But
Very cool.
I think things are changing. So it's not just publishing. It's not just management anymore. You're always doing a little something extra.
Yes, it's so true. And I do want you to share a little bit too, because both of you guys have worked for major record labels. You both have experience in that realm. Now you've also managed different artists. I know firsthand from hearing you guys share stories about your experiences that you're basically working and training these artists on how to find success both on their own, and then in some cases signing to a label. Other cases, maybe that's not the best option for them. But before we get into all of that, I would love for Brandon Egerton, if you could share a little bit about the key elements that make up a record label and how they function, because I think that's the starting point of today's discussion is like, what are record labels? Why would an artist want to sign to them, and how are they set up and how do they function?
Right. Yeah, I think that's such a great question. In fact, I'll start with it from the perspective of an A&R person. I get that question sometimes. It's like, what does an A&R do? Part of it is you have to understand enough about a lot of areas. And so, for example, as an A&R person, you're interacting with not only the creative side, with the artists and their teams, their management, you've got your songwriters, you've got your engineers, you've got your producers, you've got your musicians, you've got, on the label end of things, you've got the licensing department, you've got publishing, you've got the marketing department, you've got distribution, sales, so many executives, so many other areas that you're interfacing with, as an A&R person that are representative of what you need to kind of understand as an artist. And so when you look at a label traditionally, what do? They discover artists, they develop artists, they provide production, for artists, they, take care of distribution for artists, marketing, promotions. All of those are areas within the record company that are a part of what a label does. And much of that has shifted nowadays. I think one of those big components is artist development. Back when I was with EMI, we had the flexibility and the budget and the economics of things made sense to where you could take chances on artists a bit better, a bit more. Nowadays, you've got to be a bit more careful about that and ensure that the artists that you're bringing on are as release ready as possible. In fact, that's about the expectation today versus back in the day, where you could take a few more of those chances and that sort of thing. And so when I think about one of those things that artists need to be aware of, one of the biggest things is you got to understand your why. Why would you want to be signed as an artist? What is the actual purpose, the business benefit to your career in doing that? Well, what's a label going to do for you? It's generally going to be one of those three things. It's going to be distribution, it's going to be production, it's going to be marketing and promotions. If you can take any or all of those things off of the table, then you reduce your need for a record deal in that regard. And so it's easier said than done, certainly, because it all requires investment and talent and relationships and all those things that having a successful career involves. But that's in essence what that why sort of comes down to, in understanding your reason, your goals for why you would want to have a record deal. And then the other part of it really is, are you truly ready for what that entails? Someone taking the risk of signing you as an artist, that there's a great level of expectation that comes with that. You've entered now the business component of what we do, and so you have to have a great understanding of that, being the person on the other side of that deal, and ensure that you are coming to the table really with the expectation that I am a partner in this. I'm ready and willing to work for the benefit of a win-win, with my other partners that I'm involved with in that regard. And so I've always said, and I said this a decade plus ago when I was signing artists and working with different artists, I'm like, this is a fantastic time to be an artist. Because of some of the things we'll get into a little bit more today when you talk about the resources and the availability and the ability to release projects and share your creativity with the world. So looking forward to, certainly discussing that a little bit more here.
That's a really great foundation for today's discussion. So I really appreciate that. Sure. And then I really want to hear from you, Chris and Brandon Thomas. I would love for you guys, because you're in the industry right now, I would love for you guys to share. And I'm sure it's changed quite a bit just in the last 10 years or so that you guys, since you left Full Sail and then got into the industry, it's evolving quite quickly, right? So Brandon, would you like to start off by sharing a little bit about how you think maybe the industry has evolved and just anything that you feel that artists should be aware of as they consider signing to a label versus doing things themselves?
Got you. I think Brandon like kind of hit the nail on the head. It's just their why. I think record labels, in terms of what they offer in marketing, distribution, a lot of it can be figured out on the artist's behalf or with the team that they build themselves. So I mean, we know now that there's like an abundance of distribution, like platforms, and I'm not going to go down the list of names, but distribution is no longer a factor. It's really marketing. And a lot of it is handled on social media, and you build a lot of leverage from when handling it on social media. So I think right now, when you have everything kind of lined up, I think a label deal or a label situation can make a lot of sense. But I don't feel like it's necessarily, a need to have thing for artists right now.
Right.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And I know you had some experience, like especially during COVID times, right, where you were working with Push Play, which they specialize in TikTok marketing. So before I have Chris comment on that, can you tell us a little bit too about what your involvement was with that and how important platforms like TikTok are for artists?
Yes. So with Push Play, I helped build out the database for all the influencers and the clients that we had. I also helped with coming up with some of the ideas for some of the TikTok campaigns. TikTok is important for artists when they handle it the right way. I think during COVID, especially as TikTok became more popular, I think it became another platform where artists was, thinking like, okay, I'm just going to share my snippet of my music video or find another way to promote my songs. I feel like artists didn't really take advantage of connecting with the wide variety of people who are on TikTok, because it's not as common. Like, with Instagram, you're following people. That's mainly who you see, unless you really spend a lot of time on the Explore page. But TikTok's whole thing was, I'm gonna introduce you to new things even if you don't follow these people. And I feel like
Yeah.
What I noticed with a lot of the campaigns that was happening, it was just like kind of a rinse and repeat thing where people would
Mm.
then just say, okay, I have a song coming out. We're going to do a TikTok campaign on it. And what became the issue is a lot of artists' songs were going, but no one knew who the artist was. They just knew the song. Oh yeah, that's
Oh,
that TikTok song.
yep.
So I think for artists with TikTok, it's really to take advantage of really building that relationship with the following or who your
Hmm.
following is on those platforms, and finding ways to create content that can then just kind of represent the brand.
I love it. That's really helpful. And I think a lot of times people don't really know what to do on social media. And so they're
Right.
just pushing stuff out there. And sometimes it's not the most appropriate thing for their target market, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe
100%.
they're sharing a little bit too much, or it's a little too,
Yeah,
it's like
absolutely.
there's a lot of different approaches that you can take. So I appreciate you sharing that, Brandon. Hey, so Chris, tell us a little bit about what you've observed over the last 10 years or so that you've been in the industry and how things have changed. I know when you were working with Atlantic, you were the director of A&R research, right? So you were researching artists before they were signed. Can you talk a little bit about that and how important it is, from that perspective with developing content and whatnot?
Totally. And I mean, I think that's the big word that we're all saying in one way or another, right? I think it's just access to data, to information, and the way that people use that now to affect their decisions. Whether, you know, when I first started, it was literally looking at and this is before streaming, it was like, what records are getting even a few spins at radio in Greensboro or random markets, whatever, and what is the effect it's having on digital sales, right? And then now that's sort of changing to okay, when you got a spot on New Music Friday, that used to mean X hundreds of thousands of streams. Now it means, maybe 20,000 streams or so if you're in the bottom of that, giant list of songs now. So the drivers are changing. TikTok is obviously a big mover right now, but I think that's a big part of the conversation is TikTok, Facebook, MySpace before that, Vine in between, those are other people's houses. And I think what we're talking about now is this shift from sort of, these mansions that people get to be the host of the party of for a day or two, X their song going viral.
Hmm.
Um, where do people go after? Where are their homes? Where
Yeah.
do fans engage that are fans of a particular thing? I think all the the artists like the Taylor Swifts and all those are so big that those communities find themselves in their own pockets. But I think, with 100,000 plus songs every day now, everybody got what they
Right.
wanted. Majors don't have the power that they used to have. They're still highly effective because they have the relationships and the global impact that an individual can't really just snap their fingers and make happen immediately. But what comes with that is there's a lot of noise now. So marketing
Yes,
becomes
Yes.
key.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Very interesting.
And that's
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah, there is so much content out there, right? It's like you're competing for eyes and ears
Mhm.
constantly, and that can be a real challenge for artists. So let's talk a little bit about the structure of a record deal in the respect from a financial standpoint, right? And so the goal, right, is to make money off your music. And I don't know that people really understand that there's multiple revenue streams, right? It's not just, you're not really even trying to sell the music so much anymore
Right.
these days. It's really everything else you're trying to sell to make money because you can get music for free. So let's talk about a little bit about the revenue streams. And then also, how does that look when you're signed to a record label versus doing something yourself, right? Because there's a lot of profit sharing that goes into that from a record label standpoint. So
Right.
Brandon Egerton, would you like to start us off with that
Yeah, I'll,
question?
I'll kick us off, and so yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, the traditional structure of artists get signed, and there's artist royalties, and there's back end, and there's signing bonuses and all these things that are associated with it. It just kind of the economics changed all of that really. Now I love and benefit from our streaming culture, and the ability to be exposed to so much more music than I might have, in my own little curated, personal playlists. I mean, there's such benefit to that. There's so many different artists that I've discovered, on my own and things of that nature, just in my general enjoyment of music that, without some of those things, I would not have had the ability to do that. In our era when we were buying CDs and putting down 17.98 for, waiting in line at Target for a project to drop and all those kinds of things. But there's a real economic effect, in terms of our industry as it's associated with that. I mean, it trickles all the way down to what I was talking about in an earlier question about when it comes to artist development. It affects all those things all the way down. And so as an artist, you certainly have to understand, okay, what is my goal ultimately? Yes, share my music, my creativity, my craft with the world in some way. That's absolutely a part of it. It's why they're artists, right? But if you want to do this as a career, you have to ultimately be able to connect it in some way to something financial. You have to find a way to monetize that on some level, and that's a lot of the shift, right? It's gone from, the traditional, artist royalty or writer royalties, which those are obviously still very much valid, and particularly in terms of writer royalties and licensing opportunities and things of that nature. But how can I shift my mentality in terms of how I monetize my craft? And that's where I feel like the opportunity is, but it's very complicated. As we've alluded to, there's so much, not just from the music side, so much in the marketplace that, in terms of it being flooded and oversaturated, but now you're competing with people's attention on social media from everything from the next pair of J's that are dropping to the next iPhone that's being released and all these other products that are out there. And it's so challenging to sort of break through. For me, I'm an A&R guy at heart, and it always comes down to the songs. It always comes down to the craft. You got to give me something to work with that allows the product to really cut through the clutter in that way. And that's the starting point for me. I know it's not exactly answering the question in terms of the finances, but I had to drop that in there. It's like that's this aspect of it that I want to make sure we get back to, is focusing on that craft of creating great songs that connect with people, that move people, that inspire people, that compel people to want to now invest financially in some way, whether that is over the course of streaming or downloads or in some other fashion, which is going to be more so probably seeing an artist on tour and participating financially in that way, or purchasing merch, or any other forms of revenue that we've had to pivot to as an industry. So it's an interesting pathway that you have to kind of carve out for yourself to navigate what's in the industry. But if you've got a great product, like anything else, I think it will find its way to the proper consumers at that point.
That's awesome. Yeah, really great advice. Like, it really boils down to put out quality music and things will happen for you, right? That's the great starting point.
Yeah.
So Chris, tell us a little bit, can you build off of that some? Because I know that you've worked with many different artists over the years. Have you seen certain revenue streams be more profitable than others? How important is it for artists to perform live in front of people? Is that is that necessary these days? Like, tell us a little bit about your perception of that.
And I mean, I think also, some of this, I don't know if we even really touched on it, is like the types of recording deals, whether you do them or not, because obviously there can be, if you do end up, whether it's distribution or something that's more of like a net profit split situation or a traditional royalty based deal, all of these have varying effects on like your ownership, but also what kind of, money can be advanced to you. So that's like one area that we didn't talk about that much. And this doesn't just, by
I think
the way,
we should talk. Yeah, I think we should talk about that though, because it's not, with every record deal, it's not a one size fits all approach, right? There's lots of different options that can happen, and then it's like, are you hoping to get rich quick and have a million? Like, what's the consequences of like having a big amount of money pumped into your marketing or into your art right away? Like, can you share what your experience has been like with that, Chris? Because I know you've been in it and you've worked with artists in that capacity for years. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it all boils down to expectations too, because obviously, like, we're giving up significant portion of the expectations should be significantly higher. And because in theory, you're taking on more of a risk. And the idea is the label. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you now. Yeah, you broke up for just a second, but you're doing good now.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
But what was I saying? Oh, yeah, just that conversation you're having before even doing a deal about like what the expectation is, something that's more of distribution, they might be advancing you money based on like what has your catalog already done and what can, they're going to play it more safe to some degree, and you might not get as many services. The challenge comes that like, yes, a lot of these companies, whether they're distributors or labels, they can do all of these services, but what is it that the artist should be doing, or should be expected from the artist and communicated to them? Sometimes it's communicated well by the A&R person. Sometimes it's not communicated so well. Because again, there's a lot of these people, it's young kids who are signing other young kids, and they might know themselves. They just have the relationship and they know good music when they hear it. But having great music and, the way you run your business are sort of two different things. So
it's true.
Great music doesn't mean you do good business, and vice versa. So I think it's just understanding what it is that you're signing, what the expectations are from you to the label or whoever the funding partner is, and the other way around too. And I think, again, like a lot more people are going to be doing this without a record deal than they are going to be doing one with a record deal. So I think I used to have to stand in line at Warped Tour and convince people to buy my burnt CD for as much money as they were willing to give me. And now music feels free to people. It's one, subscription divided up amongst a bunch of people. It really comes back to that attention economy. And I think the sooner that an artist can realize the value in that, like that fan that's right in front of them, and stop looking over their shoulders and looking at the billions of people there are in the world, the better off they're going to be. Because you build fans the same way now as you did 30, 40 years ago, and that's one by one.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Kind of back to the question I had for you about, like, do artists need to play? I mean, with us being in this like digital world, how important is it for them to like be physically present in front of an audience? Or is it okay to just create music and like, because I've met so many of our music production students. I used to teach a class in there on like personal branding, and so many of them have no intentions of ever performing live, right? Is that even necessary? Like, what's your experience been like with that?
I think it's expensive to play shows. And I think the pandemic taught us a lot about like, I think it was an expectation before, and now it's sort of a question you have to ask yourself. And I think that question should be formed in like, where is my community? For an EDM artist, most of the time, soft ticket shows are probably enough. Like participating in one of the big festivals like EDC or anything like that, like their community is probably there. Do they have to go and do the hard ticket sales, meaning like they're the reason people are walking in that door? I don't know. I think an alt rock band might be, I think the expectation's more there than like an up and coming pop star. Like they seem to kind of come out of nowhere and they're all of a sudden on a bigger stage. Maybe, touring looks like opening on something, there's so many different ways this happens, but I think it's really just like, do I need to do this? Do I want to do this for my well-being? And if I do, where is my community and how should I do it?
Yeah. Really great advice. Yeah. My next question is for you, Brandon Thomas. I would love for you to share a little bit about like some of the common pitfalls that artists might see when it comes to, navigating record deals. I know you've worked with a lot of different artists in various capacities, both on the label side and then also as an artist manager. So if you were to give any advice to the artists that you're working with on some of the challenges that might come up as they try to navigate a record deal, or maybe not.
I mean, I think it all kind of centers back to the why. Like, why are you
Mm-hmm.
seeking a record deal? What is like kind of your goal? How much of the work have you done on your own? I think a lot of it, when you sign a deal too early, you kind of put a lot of responsibility on the marketing team to figure all those things out for you, and it sometimes doesn't bring back the results that you want. So I would always start with the why, and then also just kind of knowing your value going into a lot of the situations, because if you don't know your value and what you're seeking for your own career, you'll be given anything, and it might look like a big amount to begin with, but it might not, result in the success that you're looking for in the long term. I'm trying to think, what else would I say?
Yeah. Well, with
I
that
mean, I
being
guess
said,
unrealistic oh, I'm sorry.
oh no, go ahead, Brandon. Yeah, finish
Oh,
what you were
no.
saying. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think also like just having unrealistic expectations of going into a deal as well.
Yeah.
I think that thinking that it's the end all be all of like you reaching success is also like one of those pitfalls, especially when knowing the value of music being put in this place of like streaming, and the percentage of what you get from a stream is like, you got to really be mindful of what you're trying to get into, and like how you're going to see your way through paying the deal, paying the company back the money that they're fronting for marketing and services and everything else.
Yeah. And I've recently seen artists like literally like give up the record deal. Like they don't even want to have anything to do with it. They're like, I'd rather
Right.
just do it on my own.
Yeah.
Because they feel that there's too much of a risk involved with that. So
Yeah.
how about that, Brandon?
Yeah, I've got pretty strong opinions on this one. This is the single biggest factor that led me to launch my music consulting company. Even back while I was with the label, I got so tired of seeing, and really disheartened and saddened, seeing so many incredibly talented and gifted creatives get taken advantage of, find themselves on the precipice of bad deals and and not being able to fully take advantage of or properly take advantage of the opportunities that were in front of them, simply because they just didn't understand the business that they were getting involved in. It was all gas, no brake. It was all creative. It was all this, but not nearly the understanding necessary in terms of understanding the structure of our industry and the business that is the backbone of it. And so it saddened me so much so I'm like, okay, what can I do to help change that? Because it understanding the business side it doesn't come naturally to a lot of creatives, right? I mean, we've all worked with them. It's not something that you just kind of have that other end of it. You're like super creative, and it's like, oh yeah, I've got the business thing down. You have to really work for that. You have to really embrace that. You have to really understand that, okay, I need some people in my corner that I can trust that help me in this area to help ensure that I get to do this for many years to come, and actually build a career out of this, but not just hand it off to somebody like, oh, that's my person, they just had to handle their thing. I've got to have a solid understanding of what's happening and how the industry functions. So I'm not over there frustrated about some things that don't even work the way I have it kind of, set up in my mind that it's gonna work. And so, it used to drive me nuts, when I would sit in these, in a conference room across from an artist, and he just really didn't have that perspective. And I used to think, like, what other profession can we get into that we haven't put the work in and become students of the game? I want my doctor, I want my attorney, I want my, people in all these other professions that I'm getting, I'm connected to. I want them to be knowledgeable in the areas that I'm seeking their expertise on and that they're involved in, knowing that they've put the time in and the effort and become students of the game. As artists and as creatives, I, strive to help them become that, as well in that way, understanding that they're not going to fully be on that side. But if you're serious about having a career in this industry, especially now with it being so indie driven, you have to have a really solid understanding of that as well.
Yeah, very interesting. And that ties in very well with my next question, because I would love, and Chris, I'm going to direct this towards you. What are the difference between like an independent or DIY approach versus like pursuing the record deal route? You know what I mean? Like, what's really the differences between the two? And then I know from your experience of working on the research side of things, when people create this content from a DIY standpoint, what are the record labels looking at, or what are they looking for to see if that's even something that they would want to pursue or, work with an artist in a contract, situation?
Totally. I mean, I think a lot of times when you're talking about research, you're talking about a very like songs oriented thing, right? Because a lot of times it's
Mm-hmm.
like one song is usually like raising its hand, like,
Mm-hmm.
that could look like it's going viral on TikTok, or um, it was synced on this TV show, or some, artist like put them in their playlist and they're prominent artists. Like there's so many drivers
Mm-hmm.
that can happen. So
Yeah.
like the labels are going to be looking at like, okay, we're seeing something is growing. Maybe a manager is flagging and being like, hey, this person got 1 million streams last week. And then the job is like, okay, well, what are the drivers, and how can we scale it? Like if
Mm-hmm.
somebody just got like on a playlist and it's got like 10 streams and 1,000 different places, it doesn't look as good as 1,000 streams in one place, because
Mm-hmm.
again, that scaling aspect of it is what the label is looking for. And then they're going to, I think whether you're an independent artist and you want to stay independent or you want to work at a label, I think it's important to understand your own data so that you can like understand what's going on, because a lot of people will even like overvalue themselves as the creative, or the label will overvalue. Um, and again, a major can afford to like take that financial loss.
Mm-hmm.
I think what the artist is giving up in those types of situations a lot of times is really, and you might stay on that label for a long time. People talk about being shelved or whatever the thing is. That's not as common now as it used to be. But I think understanding what is driving your streams, where your community is, how much like money you are currently bringing in, so that any investment coming in, it's not just like, hey, what do you value the work I'm doing right now, but what do you value the work of what we can be doing together over the
Mm-hmm.
term of our agreement, and um, best case scenario, um, that deal, if things go well, you'll probably end up making more money than what it was valued at, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
usually when people sort of start to get upset, I think. But
Mm-hmm.
if things don't go well, and most of the time they don't, honestly,
Yep.
um, you're going to have made some money, and you will have made less money than whatever was advanced to you. And that could be from the partnership not working out, that could come from just being overvalued. There's so many things that can go right and go, but more that can go wrong.
Right.
I think it's just understanding like the current state of your business and back to the expectations.
Yeah. Very interesting. And then Brandon Thomas, I know you're working with artists now. What are some of the what's the content look like that you're encouraging your artists to put out there to help gain traction? Like what is it that you're doing that you would say is like a DIY approach to, or an independent approach to putting your music out there?
So for me, it's interesting because so I have an artist who's with a distribution company, and then I have an
Mm-hmm.
artist who's signed to Rock. So Ruben
Oh, I
Vincent is
didn't know
signed to
that
Rock
Ruben
now.
was signed to
Yeah,
Rock. That's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
And then Tyler is distributing his music through AWOL. So there's a lot more creative freedom of what we
Mm-hmm.
do, and there's really not that many checks and balances of like how we choose to do things.
So yeah,
But I
so
think across,
yeah, well,
I was gonna say, I
just
think,
real quick question on that though, real quick. Sorry
yeah,
to interrupt you, but so Ruben is signed to a label, so you feel like he's got like a lot more. There's a few more walls. There's a little more
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
structure built
yeah,
around what he
Yeah.
does, right?
Yeah.
right,
Where Tyler is kind of doing more of his own thing, but he has a distribution deal, correct?
yes,
Okay, cool.
yes.
I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so keep going. I want to hear more.
Okay, so I think across the board, I think when we kind of even dive back into like the TikToks, the social media, things like that, I'm very big on the artist really building the brand around themselves on these
Mm-hmm.
platforms, like really making sure that the content is connecting to their fans. I think when we think of social media, I don't think the core of social media was ever take your music and just spam it all the time. And I think a
Right.
lot of artists' approach to marketing has been that. So it's like, I
Yeah.
think we're just now in a time for both of them. I think we're in a time where we just got to figure out the content that represents each one of their brands and how they can talk to their fans and what their fans like. And I think you really move like off of trial and error in that space where, you know, you got to figure out what works before, you know, you can keep hitting it hard with like marketing and things like that. Um, aside from just social media, I think it's also figuring out like their style and things like that as it
Uh-huh.
relates back to cover art, what type of opportunities on the brand sides that, you know, come up. On the Ruben side, there's a lot of support in bringing brands to the table. For Tyler, it's also figuring out what
Nice.
brands work for him. And I think that's been pretty much a huge approach on that front.
Yeah. So just curious though. So when you're working with the label with Ruben's brand, for
Mm.
example, do they want to like review everything he's putting out there? How much freedom does he have to like just be himself and do his own thing? How involved are
He
they?
has, yeah, he has a lot of freedom to do that. I think it's just more so taking in the critiques when they do come in and
Mm-hmm.
knowing how to, you know, either make changes to it or express himself, like, you know, because you're dealing with, you know, the labels and you don't want to, you know, rub anybody the wrong way. So you're also
Right.
dealing with like egos and things like that. So I think he has a lot of freedom to do that. It's just more so figuring out when to execute, like, you know, I don't want to do this versus okay, I'm gonna do it because it makes sense. It's like we're not
Yeah.
all experts in every area, so we got to take advice
Sure.
when we get it sometimes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, good luck to you with both of those artists. It sounds like they're both on their way and doing really well. So that's really great. Um, so
Definitely, thank you.
so kind of speaking of like artists that you guys have worked with in the past, are there any specific artists that kind of stand out to you? Maybe some successful examples of artists who were able to make it without the involvement, like a huge backing of funds, like from a label to start off. Is there anything? Does anything like resonate with you, Brandon or Chris or Brandon?
I mean, I think, you know, while I'm like, I think an example that comes to mind, like pretty immediately, there's two. One is when I was working with Reggie, an alternative R&B artist that went by R.Lum.R, Lamar.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we had built a relationship with Spotify pretty early on just by sharing music. And this was back when you could still talk to the editors directly as long as you knew who they were and everything like that. So um, I think that's a big part of all this, right? Is that like as the industry grows, there's always these like opportunities in like whoever was before it, you know, was turned into TikTok, felt like they had an inside view of like what was going to happen with that app before everybody else, you know, jumps on board. But usually by the time everybody else is on board with something, there's a lot more like walls that get put up to
Mhm.
like protect the people, like for better or worse, in my opinion. And I think that was one way that he was able to create an opportunity not being signed to a label.
Uh-huh.
Eventually, that brought really, you know, favorable terms for him when he did eventually sign record deals. Um, and then Anna Clendenning, she had built a following off the back of a performance on America's Got Talent and Vine,
Nice.
and through that just was really good at communicating directly with her fans, and it turned into streams, it turned into, you know, I think it turned in that ultimately turned into what became a record deal for her, and we were able to, you know, build past multiple gold and platinum records off of like literally just like the momentum that she had, but then putting fuel on the fire that she's like
Mhm.
already really good at stoking. So feel like I feel like that's those are two examples I have in my like my life so far.
Yeah, very cool. Well, and I remember when you were working with Arlamar too, and that like I I was at Ross the other day and I heard one of the songs playing on and I was like, oh, that's the guy that Chris is working with. I was like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. So
But that's good music, right,
it's
Brandon?
great
right.
music.
Absolutely.
How about you? Either one of you
Um,
have any, Brandon, Thomas, do you have any artists that you've worked with that you can think of that have found success without the help of a label?
I think my examples would be kind of in the same wheelhouse as Chris, where it's like, they're signed now, but I worked
Hmm.
with the baby super early on,
Nice.
like before Suge came out and he had that success. But like just even seeing him in the Charlotte area while he was coming up, it was always a lot of building that leverage for when that opportunity or that deal comes on the table. He was at South by Southwest, he was doing the shows, he was
Sure.
selling the merch and stuff like that. So it was also really dope to see like the vision that he had for himself as an artist, like come to fruition, like, the following year, once Suge came out and everything around visuals, everything was already figured out. And I think in that space, like Chris said, it builds like the leverage that he has. So when he goes into these conversations, he had, favorable deal on his end. And I mean, of course I would have to say Jake. I got to work with Ethan
Oh, yeah.
while we was at Push Play, and I got to even just see how Jake just operated on his own accord for his own schedule. Like he had his whole day, week, month planned out, and it's really dope to see, because it's like a lot of putting a lot of things on your back when you're doing things DIY, and just to have
Yeah.
that work ethic and that accountability to make sure you're checking all those boxes before it comes to a deal, which Jake still, and similar to Tyler, he's still with AWOL, still independent. Whenever
Hmm.
that situation comes now where he does want to sign, he has the numbers, he has the tours,
Yeah.
he has everything to, leverage that, whatever he wants in those deals.
Yeah. I saw Jake perform at South by Southwest back in March. And I saw him do it. He spoke at South by Southwest as well. And at that time, he was like, I just want to write music. I don't want to sign to a label. I have no desire to. And meanwhile, his career is like taking off. When he came to Orlando, he was at a sold out show for House of Blues. I think every stop on his tour was sold out. I'm like, this guy is like killing it. It's
Yep.
like
Right.
crazy to see how it's just blown up. But I think his career took off during COVID, right? Like all because of
Right.
TikTok, right? Which is
100%.
yeah, which he has some really funny and creative content on there too. So
Right.
I can see why it got some traction.
Yeah.
What do
Right.
you
And I
think are
think
some
I
of?
think even just
Uh huh. Oh, go ahead,
I was
Brandon.
gonna say,
Sorry.
I
Go ahead.
think even just to add to like that element of the DIY approach, I feel like on
Sure.
both sides, like, they both had great managers. They had a great team, like Ethan on the Jake side,
Yeah.
and Arnold Taylor and Carter on the baby side. Like they definitely helped cultivate and, bring everything that they had envisioned for their careers to life. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a huge
It
factor
really
in it.
takes a team, doesn't it? I mean,
Absolutely.
to have all of you guys working in from an artist manager's perspective or an A&R. I mean, it takes a team of people. And so having your music business background and being able to help those artists, I mean, that really, you're really having a profound impact on their careers, which is really impressive.
You brought up something, Heather, if I can kind of mention that, because that gets conflated, I think, a lot of times when it comes to creatives. It's like you never get away from needing other people, to help you achieve some of the goals that you have. And that's going to look different, certainly, for different people. But there, at the same time, there is this thing, and there's certainly been situations people have been burned and, all those kinds of things. So it doesn't come from a place that's not legitimate. But there is this, you have to embrace the team and the need for others. But you're also kind of running from something in a way that you have to assess and understand, okay, is there a business reason for that? I've had artists getting frustrated, for example. It's like, you won't, put more money into my project. Well, there's a lot of factors that kind of go into that, in terms of whether the spigot gets turned on or not, or whatever, in that regard. But if everybody's on the same page, and this goes to the team part of it in terms of wanting success for X project. Everybody from the label to the artists to the production teams involved to management and everyone in the business pipeline, then we've got a great opportunity for something to be successful. One of my great friends and artists, writers used to say all the time, man, 100% of nothing is nothing. And so sometimes we get so much of this thing of like, no, I'm going to do it all myself. It's just me. I don't need anybody. I don't want anybody. But at the end of the day, 100% of nothing is nothing. So sometimes there's that reason to give up something, maybe some creative control. Somebody's, putting revenue and into the project and investing from that perspective. I mean, there's give and take that's going to be necessary, I think, by way of anything that is going to be successful. And so it's why having great people around, you mentioned great managers. You got to have those people, those right people in your ear who are going to say, no, this is a great opportunity. No, trust me on this. Or, that are in your corner going to be looking out for your best interest. And so it's an interesting collective that and dynamic that has to be in place for a project, for a career, to be successful. And I love it when that happens. I think social media gives us a great opportunity to witness many more of those success stories that have been out there than maybe what would have been common 20 years ago, for example. Yeah. So loving that.
So many more options with social media the way it is today. What do you guys consider to be the most important tools, like technology tools? And they could really be anything. It could be for promotion or even like, royalty management or any of that kind of stuff. What are like your top tech tools that you would recommend that artists or their teams leverage as they're getting started? Chris, do you have any suggestions? Or Brandon, you want to go first?
Yeah, I was going to say one of my top ones is chart metrics. Chart metrics gives you so much information.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important one for sure. How about you, Chris? Anything that you would add?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like, it goes back to that, like, just the understanding your data and information and like what it means for your career, and I think just places like Chartmetric, like on its own, work well, but I think making sure that like you go through and that like it's like sending your information to the platform properly and all of that. I mean, that also just makes sure that like, other businesses who are looking at it too can see that, like, oh, this is the correct information, especially if you have a name that's pretty common. There's a chance that like data is not going to the right place, or a name that's like misspelled frequently or anything like that. Like, that's really what I mean by like not only owning your data in like understanding it, but also just making sure that it's going out to people in the right way too, I think it's crucial, because if like people don't see the business and work that you're doing, like it's not that it's not happening. It's just like, you can't necessarily be like, I wonder why people aren't hitting me up,
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not set up properly, then that can be a big problem for sure. Brandon, Egerton, what about the legal aspects? Like, what are some legal things to take into consideration when?
Yeah, well, I'll answer from this perspective, perhaps. I think, because we're talking quite a bit about labels, you have to have, as a creative, and particularly, especially as an artist, you have to understand how labels work. And then position yourself accordingly. Now that's not saying the goal is to go out and sign artists like labels do and things from that perspective. But when I'm advising artists, it's one of the first things I tell them is that I want you to envision yourself, and I want you to function from the mentality of a label, the positives, trying to take advantage of people and all those kinds of things. But the sooner I think you understand that that there are key ingredients and pathways to success, that you look across really any project, there are some things that are common. Now, there's not a formula. Don't mistake in that. I'm not saying there's a formula. If we knew it, we'd have a million hit records in all our resumes, of course. But there are certain key ingredients, I think, that are common when you look at success in our industry. And so you have to be familiar with those things from a business perspective, and things like timelines and certainly understanding, having a firm understanding of how copyright, publishing works, licensing, distribution, all of those kind of key components of a project release, for example, making sure you're covered and taken care of from a legal standpoint. I can't tell you how many situations. I'll use a songwriter, for example. You get in a writer session and a collaboration with some others. You release your song. Your song has some great success, and then all of a sudden, out of the woodworks, you're getting a call, or contacted, by someone else that was in the room that says, "Hey, I was a part of this," you know. But if you didn't handle your business, you didn't handle your song sheets, your writer splits, and all those things appropriately on the front end, you risk having people coming out of the woodwork saying, "Hey, I was a part of this," or "This is part of my song," or "This is you sampled this inappropriately for me," or all these things that have legal, and in many cases expensive legal implications on your creativity. The more you understand the business and how it works and have a firm foundation under your belt, the more you're going to be able to avoid some of those pitfalls that artists, writers, and creatives deal with in our industry. And that's one of those challenges out there, because there is such lack of knowledge when it kind of comes to that, and people kind of feel, "Oh yeah, I heard, let me grab that. Okay, I went over that. Let me pull that." I mean, we're not even going to get into AI and all that other, in terms of how that is good, will impact things moving forward. But that's a major factor that you want to make sure you have a solid grasp on if you're going to do this seriously.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And there's so many things to, like, the whole copyright, like that whole piece of it, and paying royalties and all that. That's like, I think a lot of artists don't even really realize how important it is to have a firm grasp of those things.
Absolutely.
And surround yourself with the right people to make sure the contracts are in place, and that that you're covered.
You're covered. It's doing business, right? I mean, it kind of goes down at the end of the day, is understanding that you are engaging in a business, and the better prepared you are for that, and the better you understand that, the better chance you give yourself, I think, to be successful.
Very good. So, gentlemen, I have a question for you regarding creative freedom. Okay. So, Brandon, you talked a little bit about your Ruben working with Rock Nation and stuff like that. How can artists balance creative freedom and commercial success? And I think as an artist's career even starts to take off, right? We've all seen, I've seen some of my favorite artists, like they put out their second album because their label encouraged them to do so within a certain time frame. And it doesn't sound anything like the first album, you know what I mean? It's like a complete departure. So Brandon, what's been your experience as far as like creative freedom and commercial success from that perspective?
I think it really starts with like the vision that you have for yourself. I don't think every artist is seeking commercial success. I mean, you have certain artists, especially in hip hop, like you have some artists who are very niche type artists, and if commercial success finds them, so be it. But that's not their main focus.
Right.
And I feel like that is something that I deal with both artists, because they're very hands-on with a lot of it, production, songwriting, everything like that. They like to do a lot of it on their own. I feel like it's just really nurturing that until the right opportunity comes along, whether it be, a label deal or for Untitled, and or where, that is now the main focus of like, trying to recoup in a situation. But I don't feel like I've really had to deal with that too much on my end. I feel like I just help the artists in whatever way, especially on the development side, because I feel like I do artist development as well as management with both of them.
Nice.
And I think sometimes you get a commercial successful record out of just building in that space of like just creating art.
Yeah, so true.
But I don't
like
feel
that.
on my end, on both the rock side or the AWOL side, is no one's forcing them like, yo, you got to do this. So
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And that's true. I believe that a lot of your artists that you're working with, they're not looking for that commercial success. They're looking more about building a community among people that love and support what they're doing, which is really great. How about you, Chris? Because you've seen, especially you working for a publishing company, right? Like, what about like creative freedom and writing songs and publishing your own music? Like, what do you have to say about that?
Man, it's so funny because I the publisher, the label side of it, creative, the creative freedom to me is like, I think people usually define it as like one or the other. It's either people are involved in what you're doing creatively or they're not at all. And I feel
Uh-huh.
like creative freedom is aligning with what is best for your creative process at the time. And I think that changes regularly. There are some people who, some creatives I know that like they started out and worked really well when they were working by themselves, but now they need to surround themselves with some other people to be inspired, or the other way
Sure.
around, where they started off collaborating with a lot of people. That was great, but now it's exhausting and they're more inspired by what they have going on. So just want to be clear that creative freedom doesn't look one way or the other,
Mm-hmm.
in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, at least. And then two, I think it's always funny because I think people like somebody has creative freedom like entirely, or there's less people involved in it or whatever, and it's going to automatically be more successful than if other people are involved in helping. And that doesn't, it's like I've seen it work all different ways,
Yep.
and usually no matter what, no matter how much creative freedom an artist gets or doesn't get, it's always going to be the label's fault or the manager's fault or someone
Absolutely.
else.
Right. Right.
That's usually what ends up happening. It's never the creative's fault in their mind.
Yeah.
I think the smart ones own their portion of it, but
Mhm.
um, but as far as just seeing like maintaining creative freedom, I think it's just communicating. Like
Yep.
what do you
Mm-hmm.
need
Mhm.
in your creative
Mhm.
process right now? And I think that's how you maintain it. I think
Yep.
expecting other people to know what you want without communicating it is, everyone here has so many things to, and you can't be effective for people, but you certainly will be more effective if you know what they want and need.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really great points. Well, it's almost time to wrap up our session. I'm actually going to close with one last question for you all. Okay. If you could tell any of our aspiring artists or music business professionals that are watching today, if you could give them any advice about the key factors that contribute to an artist's success, what do you believe those key factors are? And Brandon Egerton, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So that's a great question there. So I think one of those I hit on earlier. I'm all about the song. That's the start. We're talking about the music here. So that's kind of the beginning piece. Creatives, if you're songwriters, artists, spend your time on your craft. Perfecting that, having a product that is worthy of someone's investment of time and resources and all those good things. When we're talking about working with artists and creatives from the label perspective, my boss, one of my former bosses, a guy by the name of Ken Pennell, he was the president over at EMI where I worked. He used to tell us, he said, we can't work any harder than our artists are willing to work. In essence, what he was getting at is a similar thing to the Full Sail mantra of, if you're serious about your dream, we'll take your dream seriously. You long to partner with people who are serious about what they're wanting to do, what they aspire to do, utilizing their gifts and maximizing their God-given gifts and abilities in a responsible and an effective way. And so, from a business perspective, we want to partner with those people, right? Make a difference in the lives of the consumers and our fans and things of that nature. And so I think looking for people who get it, whether you're a DIY, an indie, whether you're signed to a label, it's the same. The grind, the grind is the same. The commitment is the same. The drive is the same. You gotta have them all, regardless of which side of that coin you end up on. And I think there's value and advantages and disadvantages certainly to both sides. You have to show up to the table ready and willing to work towards the goals that have set forth. And because honestly, at the end of the day, the consumer doesn't really care if you're a signed artist or if you're an independent artist. They just want something that moves them,
Yep.
something that inspires them, something that kind of keeps them coming back, something they can connect to, and it makes kind of an imprint on their lives. I'm in my 40s now, and I can think back to songs I heard from my childhood. We all can kind of go down that path, right? That just are imprinted on who we are because those songs moved us.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm all about. That's what I want to see be the effect of creatives that leave us here at Full Sail, the people who I've worked with and continue to get to work with, is they've made an impact on our society through the music and the gifts that they have. So that's me.
It's very touching, Music makes us feel good, right?
Absolutely.
And so
It should.
that's why it's such a great business to work in, and I know that that's why these guys enjoy it so much. Brandon Thomas, how about you? What do you think the key factors are for what tips? What tips do you have for artists that are looking to make it?
I feel Brandon said it all. But I think it really is like everything Brandon said, the passion mixed with good work ethic, mixed with a clear vision of what you want for yourself, whether it is being at a label, being DIY, and then just knowing how much you really have to put in is a lot. Like I think when artists sit back and really like analyze the feel that they're getting in, it's like you realize there's a lot of people doing what you're doing. So it's like to be and reach that success, or just be financially successful, not making it to a label or whatever the case may be. It's just, you have to do a lot of work, and really embrace the road of like trial and error, and understand and learn from it, and just put as much of that knowledge back into it, and don't be discouraged by any of those pitfalls.
I love it. That's really great advice. Absolutely. Be resilient. Take what you learn, keep pushing forward. That's awesome. How about you, Chris? You get to close us out for today. What profound wisdom would you like to share with our audience?
No, I mean, because I feel like Brandon, you said it like very well. And I think just adding on top of like vision, I think is like, it's so funny because a lot of times when I have a conversation with an artist and they're like, well, I want to be successful. I was like, okay, well, what does success look like for you?
Absolutely.
And a lot of times it's this very far off ethereal feeling or something that's like just not very specific or helpful. It's like, I always look at it as like an analogy. There's a lot of people trying to jump across like a giant river full of rushing water, and they wonder why they get exhausted when they have to swim back and they keep trying the same thing. But to me, goals are like stones that help you cross it. It's like you place it. It takes more time. It takes more attention. It takes care. You're not going to get completely beat down or drown. It's like you're going to cross. It's just going to take time. And I think that's that. It's being consistent and present. If you're thinking about who you are in the future all the time, or dwelling on who you've been, to be doing your job, being present, and don't get me wrong, you have to think about those things to some degree to learn or to guide, but have a plan, stick to the plan, be consistent, don't be afraid to fail on that front. I think that goes back to saying, which is like that consistency and that willingness to try something. Like people like, I say this all the time with TikTok, they'll like 5 times they're like, it didn't work. And it's like, there are so many artists who their songs like 100 times before the thing went. Tyler talks about, he's like, I made something awesome. I'm going to keep talking about it, not just before it comes out, after it comes out,
Yeah.
Like, I think it starts there. Like, if you're not excited about it, like, why should anyone else be, to some degree?
Absolutely.
Like, I think being present and consistent and being able to communicate what is success to you is key.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And write it down. I heard you have to say your goals out loud and write them down to achieve them. And I think that that's really, really profound. I appreciate all of you so very much for being a part of this panel today. It was so nice to reconnect with Chris and Brandon. I haven't seen them in a while. And of course, having you here too with your experience. And so thank you guys so much for spending some time with us today. I want to thank our audience, but most importantly, our guests today. Thank you, Brandon, and Chris for being with me today. And I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
Adam.
you.